session on GEDSI. GEDSI is, of course, gender equality, disability, and social inclusion. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Rita Reddy, and I'm the GEDSI expert at Mott MacDonald in Malaysia. This ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Forum presents an opportunity for knowledge sharing and constructive dialogue while building on the guidelines of the ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Strategy. The special session is expected to complement the ASEAN Sustainability Urbanization Strategy thematic dialogues addressing crucial thematic areas relevant for the ASEAN member states and all stakeholders. Now, just to introduce a little bit on GEDSI, urbanization trends, as you know, including the implementation of sustainable urbanization actions, impact different population groups differently due to entrenched discriminatory or social and cultural norms, unequal access to land, water, education, or other resources, or because of physical barriers presenting challenges and opportunities alike. Now, social inclusiveness represents a crucial component of sustainable urbanization. It requires the development and implementation of transformative programming and strategies suited to the differentiated needs of women, persons with disabilities, youth, children, the elderly, and the rural and urban poor. When urban design and services are planned, including water, sanitation, transport, and markets, it has to address gender discrimination and promote equal access and opportunities for all in order to achieve greater social and economic benefits for all. Marginalized groups can bring unique perspectives and contributions to sustainable practices and support the common effort to avoid entrenchment of growing exclusion and social divide. The importance of GEDSI is that the mainstreaming of GEDSI into program and projects in the ASEAN cities supports equitable distribution of benefits of activities, reducing vulnerability and increasing resilience of marginalized groups. To achieve this, of course, there is a need to understand how gender and social differences manifest in ASEAN member states, determine differentiated gendered impacts of sustainable urbanization, and develop and implement GEDSI inclusive activities. And it's also necessary to formulate GEDSI sensitive disaggregated indicators and targets, document the results of GEDSI activities, outputs, and outcomes, and use the results as a basis for knowledge sharing. Now, the objectives of today's sessions are, this session aims to contribute to the creation of a common understanding of the value of mainstreaming the GEDSI plan in urban development, especially in the context of COVID-19 recovery. In addition, the stakeholders can share learning experiences, best practices, and mechanisms for collaboration to support mainstreaming of GEDSI at local level, especially in the secondary cities of ASEAN member states. Now, just to share the structure of today's session, we have 1 hour. The agenda for today's session is as follows. We will have 2 presentations, the first one on gender equality and women's empowerment, and the second on disability and gender. This will be followed by a 25-minute panel discussion where specific questions will be posed to the panel, and the session will conclude with questions that will be open to the audience to present, as well as a short wrap-up. Now, without much ado, let me introduce our speakers and panelists for this session. On gender equality, we have Ms. Shri Hussaini Sofian, who's the Senior Program Advisor and Strategist at the Higher Commission. Then we have Ms. Madeline Suarez, the President of the Alliance of People's Organization, Along Manghahan Floodway at the Pasig in Philippines. And on disability and gender, we have Mr. Miguel Musni, Senior Officer, Poverty Eradication and Gender Division of the ASEAN Secretariat. And for the panel session, we will be joined by Mr. Nguyen Wan Chu, the Disability Research and Capacity Development Officer from Vietnam, and Ms. Antoinette Anaban, who is the Assistant City Planning and Development Coordinator and OIC of the City Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Office, City Government of Baguio City in the Philippines. Now, let us begin the session now, and I've called upon Ms. Hussaini Sofyan to make her presentation. And please bear in mind, we have a time constraint and you have 4 minutes now. Ms. Suhaini, please.
Thank you, Ms. Rita, our moderator. Very good morning, good afternoon, and thank you to the organizer for organizing this special session, an essential topic in ensuring sustainable urbanization. Now, I've been given some guidelines on what to cover. So let me start by reminding us, what is gender equality? Rita already mentioned a bit about what is gender equality. Just a reminder, it means women and men and girls and boys enjoy the same right, resources, opportunity, and protection. It does not require that girls and boys or women and men be the same, or that they are really treated exactly alike. Now, when gender equality is achieved, women, men, girls, boys will have equal rights, condition, opportunities, and the power to shape their own life, to make decisions and contribute to development of the society. So a society in which women and men enjoy the same opportunity and rights, obligation in all spheres of life will help sustain the development process. So gender equality is basically very much linked, and is actually the essential component, or I would say transformative path for sustainable urbanization, and is key to realization of human rights for all. So when we talk about gender equality, we must also talk about or mention about women's empowerment. Now, what does women empowerment means, and why I still mention about women empowerment? Because at this time, our society and men and women don't have really equal access to most resources, to decision-making process, and so on. So therefore, we still need to empower women, so that by promoting women's sense of self-worth, their ability to determine their own choices, and their rights to influence social change for themselves and for those in their community.
Sorry, Ms. Sunaini, can I just interrupt you 1 small second to remind everyone that there is interpretation in the various language available, and you can select what you wish to use. Sorry, thank you.
That's fine. So let me continue. So in the development approach, and this context, sustainable urbanization, we want to provide the same opportunity, status, and condition for women and men to participate in the process and effect the output of policy making, planning, budgeting, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, so that they would address and meet the needs of all in their community. Now, the slide next. Whoever is doing this slide for me. Yeah, thank you. So we used several. They are global frameworks that are agreed by our country, by our nation, by our government. So, the first one is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Violence Against Women. Then, in 2015, all member states adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, or what is also known as Agenda 2030. Now, there are 17 goals, but most important in this context is goal number 5, which is on achieving gender equality and women's and empowerment of all women and girls, and also the goal number 11, which is specifically on urbanization, that is make cities and human settlement inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And to help guide that, implementation of SDG 11, we have the new urban agenda, which was also adopted and agreed by all member states, over 185 member states in 2016. Now let us go to what are the core dimension of the new urban agenda, and why, where is gender placed? Next slide. So gender is placed under social sustainability, yeah. But as Rita mentioned just now, we need to mainstream the element under social sustainability to make the other core component, the other dimension of urbanization works. Economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and spatial sustainability. So for us in mainstreaming or making gender equality a component of all sustainable urbanization, we have intervention mechanism. Yeah, next slide. So within the new urban agenda, the possible intervention mechanism is identified as national urban policies, land policies, housing and slum upgrading policies, urban legislation regulation, urban design, municipal finance, and urban governance. And if you look at this mechanism intervention, and also the list of, for this particular forum, they have also identified priority sub-areas, that is inclusive growth and inclusive and equitable growth, housing and home, personal safety and security, water, sanitation and waste, mobility, urban resilience, and education. Now, these are all elements under this seventh item that is identified as intervention mechanism. In ASEAN countries, for example, I'm taking national urban policies as the main intervention mechanism for this purpose. So we have 6 out of all the members of ASEAN states that have explicit urban policies. With the explicit urban policies, gender equality cannot be put as a checklist. It has to have a component of a plan how to make that happen. That the national urban policies will result in equitable access for the enjoyment, the right to cities for all the people, men, women, girls, and boys. Yeah. So there are tools also to make this happen. The tools for for gender equality and women's empowerment. There are 10 tools. Maybe I don't have to go that. I think the time is also, Rita, I think my time is now to move to an example, but I can bring that again when under the discussion panel. So just a quick one. Yeah. Gender responsive budgeting is one that has been implemented in many of our ASEAN state. And that is a good tool to start with in terms of promoting gender equality. So I now pass to my partner in this duet for this session, Madeline Juarez, who will give you a glimpse of implementation experience on housing and on housing and homes, yeah, on the issue of housing and homes. Madeline, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share the experience and advocacy and engagement process in developing and expanding affordable housing solutions. In this context, highlighting the importance of gender equality and women's empowerment in the efforts for an on-site, near-site, and in-city resettlement. I speak here as the president of the Alliance of People's Organization along Mangahan Floodway, Pasig in the Philippines. Members of APOAMP were living in an area considered as danger area along the floodway, a structure constructed to reducing flooding in Metro Manila. Thus, we were threatened with demolition and scheduled to be moved to a faraway relocation site where there are almost no available jobs and livelihood opportunities and no access to basic services. The resettlements would affect or would impact rather at least 5,000 families. APOAMP was organized in 2010 with the help and guidance of community organizers Multiversity. They help us in terms of organizing, strategizing, leadership training, and reflections. Our objective is to pursue our stand on safe and permanent tenure and livelihood security through on-site, near-site, and NCT resettlement. Women were at the front line in this organizing and advocacy work because far away relocation will greatly affect us when we lose our work and the work of our husbands and other members of the family, as well as the lack of access to basic services like water, electricity, schools, health centers, and other services. At the start of our organizing and advocacy work, there were 20 women leaders who meet with the different housing agencies to discuss alternative options to gain security of tenure. At present, the number of active women leaders in organizing and advocacy work has increased to 65. We feel that we should get involved. This is our issue, and therefore we should speak for ourselves. We know that, like our men counterpart, we have the capacity to lead actions for the improvement of our life conditions. We have the right to live in the city and to gain security of tenure. We raised women's consciousness in the advocacy. The gender perspectives are in part important and key. And we organize and mobilize women in community to work together in exercising our to be rights and become change maker in our own community. Women understand better the issues of the vulnerable sectors like the elderly, children, the sick, and the persons with disabilities. And we therefore ensure their security and safety in choosing the housing site, design, and affordability. We map the needs and potentials for the on-site, near-site, and in-situ settlements for our community. Women's needs and aspirations were integrated in the People's Plan or community plans on the housing, livelihood security, basic services, peace and order, disaster preparedness, and health. Our 10-year organizing and advocacy works bear fruit when 2013 to 2018, 10 out of 15 low-rise buildings were constructed by NHA, benefiting 550 families. Our advocacy for the completion of the remaining 5 buildings is still continues. Recently, APOAMP worked with the National Housing Authority in partnership with the World Bank in amending the 50-year-old State Management Manual of NHA. The process of amending the manual was participatory, gender-responsive policies were added like open spaces for children, priority of occupying units of the ground floors were given to the persons with disabilities and senior citizens. The guidelines also was emphasized for the resident responsibilities for cleanliness and peace and order. The women in the alliance actively partner with the academic institutions in the training of community journalists, in mediation, and in lobbying. We also network with other NGOs in addressing health issues and in responding to challenges both brought about by COVID-19. Women's leadership was in action, immediately mapping the needs of those in the community, mobilizing assistance and support to COVID-positive families like volunteering to deliver food packages and medicine during the 14-day quarantine period, and lending seed capital without interest to families to their livelihood restoration. We hope that our success in negotiating for a gender-responsive, affordable, and in-situ settlement is an inspiration in developing and expanding affordable housing solution for an inclusive, sustainable urbanization and the rights to city of all women and men. This requires recognition of local community initiatives, building trust and partnership between local communities and local and national authorities. This is women's empowerment in action, women's leading the way. Thank you very much.
Introduce Mr. Miguel Musigny for to talk about disability and gender. And we're really delighted that a man is speaking about this issue. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Reta, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miguel. I'm one of the senior officers from the Poverty Eradication and Gender Division from the ASEAN Secretariat. Greetings from Jakarta. So, in my presentation, I'll be sharing the following key messages. As I go through the presentation, we'll see ASEAN's high-level political commitment to gender equality and disability inclusion. And then we'll see how ASEAN is trying to incorporate the response to the COVID-19 pandemic using the gender lens and disability inclusion lens. And later on, we'll see some specific concrete regional actions towards this goal. So if we can move to the next slide. As I've said, the first part of the presentation will look at ASEAN's high-level political commitment on disability inclusion. As early as 2011, the ASEAN leaders have confirmed their commitment to the inclusion of and empowerment of persons with disabilities through the adoption of the Bali Declaration on the enhancement of the role of persons with disabilities in ASEAN community. On this slide, I want to emphasize that is with the adoption of the Bali Declaration came also the adoption of ASEAN of the mobilization for persons of disabilities. The decade of mobilization that they call it. The importance of this decade of mobilization, based on this Bali Declaration, is that it mainstreamed the disability inclusion throughout the three ASEAN community pillars. If we can take a step back and imagine what ASEAN looks like, we can imagine that it being a house with three pillars. One is on the first pillar would be on the ASEAN political security community. The second one is on the ASEAN economic community. And the third one is on the ASEAN socio-cultural community. Now, with this Bali Declaration and the Decade of Mobilization for Persons with Disabilities, the commitment to mainstream across the three pillars has been established by the ASEAN leaders. There's also a recognition of the well-being and promotion of livelihood of persons with disabilities. And third one is to promote a quality of life of persons with disabilities, specifically within the context of poverty alleviation. Now, if we can move to the next slide, we'll see that ASEAN has continued its and elevated its commitment to disability inclusion with the adoption of the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan, mainstreaming the rights of persons with disabilities. This has been adopted by the ASEAN leaders also. And the added value of this master plan is that each of the ASEAN sectoral bodies within the three community pillars have specific action points that they are encouraged to undertake and incorporate in their work plans. Again, if we take a step back and imagine the ASEAN community as a house with three pillars, each of the pillars have sectoral bodies that focus on specific thematic issues. For example, the rights of persons with disabilities, social protection, financial inclusion. Now, each of these sectoral bodies are now mandated to pursue cooperation towards mainstreaming the rights of persons with disabilities. Now, if we can take a look at the next slide, we'll see that not only does ASEAN have placed a high-level political commitment on disability inclusion, but also on gender equality and women empowerment. And here we'll see several high-level ASEAN declarations and frameworks. First of all, we have the Declaration on the Gender Responsive Implementation of the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the SDGs, and also a commitment by ASEAN to mainstream women economic empowerment in ASEAN Economic Community Pillar. There's also a clear mandate to mainstream and promote women peace security in ASEAN, and also enhancing the role of civil servants as a catalytic force in achieving gender equality towards ASEAN Community Vision 2025. Now, I presented these regional declarations and frameworks to show, maybe we can call it like a constellation of regional frameworks and declarations that reaffirm, first, ASEAN's commitment to gender equality and disability inclusion. But secondly, and more importantly, it provides a clear mandate for ASEAN sectoral bodies and ASEAN member states at the national level to work together to undertake concrete actions on these issues. So now let's go to the next slide to see the specific context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So just this year, ASEAN launched the ASEAN Gender Outlook, which is a milestone and flagship publication, which looked at the gains of ASEAN in the implementation of SDGs, but specifically looking at the gender perspective against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, if we can move on to the next slide, we'll see that through the ASEAN's remarkable progress in gender equality, there is a need to reach out to vulnerable groups of women. And this is becomes very pertinent to the participants of this forum because the findings really point us at the direction of where there needs to be more partnership and action. So, for example, we're looking at maybe we can just for concrete findings, we can move on to the next slide. There you go. We see that from this report, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the progress, overall progress of ASEAN on delivering the SDGs. And as a result of the lockdowns and movement restrictions, there has been an increasing intensity and incidence of care and domestic work undertaken by women and girls. And most often than not, women sacrifice their paid employment as brought about by the pandemic. And the data indicates that women, both in formal and informal work, are more likely than men to be working fewer hours. Now, I pointed out that this would be of particular interest to the participants because there is really a need for more targeted and gender-responsive policies to address this nexus, no, between addressing unpaid care work, also on disability inclusion as they intersect, and also on looking at urban and rural settings because it has a different texture when we look at, for example, the incidence of poverty and how rural women are quite prone to being more left behind compared to their counterparts in urban settings. So some points for us to reflect on as we move along the presentation. Now, if we look at the next slide, I'll be moving on to the third part of my presentation to show some concrete examples of regional cooperation. One is on the current 5-year work plan of the sectoral body working on social welfare and social protection. The work plan's name is Strategic Framework on Social Welfare and Development that covers the period 2021 to 2025. And within this work plan, there is a specific focus on older persons, children, and persons with disabilities. Now, if we can go to the next slide, we'll see that there are clear outcomes that are intended to be achieved in the next 5 years. So we're looking at uh, the rights and well-being of persons with disabilities are promoted and protected, and the specific output would be for effective, gender-responsive, and child-sensitive mechanisms and programs. ASEAN is also looking at the agencies of persons with disabilities are enabled and empowered, and the specific target outputs would be to improve capacities and generate models of intervention. Now, specific to older persons, because we also see this intersection between older persons and person with disabilities, the work plan looks at promoting healthy and active productive aging, and specific output is promoting regional standards that can guide member states. Now, another sectoral body, if we can move on to the next slide, to show, by way of example, ASEAN's cooperation on mainstreaming gender equality is the work plan of the ASEAN Committee on Women. And here we see the thematic areas that this committee is looking at: gender data and statistics, gender mainstreaming, gender responsive climate disaster resilience, and so on. Maybe we can pause here for a while and connect this presentation, this part of the presentation, with the earlier presentation on when it was cited that the new urban agenda needs to be mainstreamed, not just within the social aspect, but also in economic, environmental, and spatial aspects. Now, within ASEAN, that is also the advocacy, specifically through gender data and statistics and gender mainstreaming. So, not just within the sectoral bodies with a clear mandate on working on women's issues and women empowerment, but also in the political security sphere and also in the ASEAN Economic Community pillar. Now, if we can go to the next slide, we'll see the specific relevant initiatives under the ACW work plan that looks at gender statistics, aiming at producing evidence-based policymaking and rigorous monitoring, with a specific proposal on advocating for availability of data disaggregated by disability status. And also, one other thing that I want to highlight is that there is currently a partnership between the ASEAN Committee on Women and the ASEAN Committee on Disaster Management. So they have this technical working group that's focusing on protection, gender, and inclusion issues within the context of disaster preparedness, disaster response, and disaster risk reduction. So that platform really looks at the nexus and intersection between all of these issues to address gender equality and disability inclusion. Now, if we can go to the next slide, I think it is the last slide in my presentation. When the COVID-19 pandemic happened, ASEAN undertook basically knowledge sharing initiatives to unpack and look at what could be the recommendations for member states and various stakeholders to work together, no? And really see the impact of the pandemic more from the using the gender lens and disability inclusion lens. So based on that, last year there were several knowledge platforms that were organized. One is on gender and aging, and also the other one is a series on disability inclusion and the COVID-19 pandemic. We're particularly happy with the latter part because there's a specific web forum on disability inclusion and smart cities and connectivity, which really articulated the need to look further and deeper on how to advocate gender equality, disability inclusion in urbanization and also the urban-rural setting and dynamics. So with that, I think I can wrap up my presentation, and I hope that you found the information I shared useful. Thank you.
Um, Thank you so much, Miguel. I know you had a lot of very important things to say, and I know I personally was very interested and was just loath to cut you off, but we really need to move to the panel now. And now for the panel, can I ask the organizers to bring all of the panelists on the screen so that everyone can see all of them, please? You can make me smaller, my picture smaller, so that we can accommodate everyone. And so I welcome all of the panelists, and I have introduced all of them earlier. I will not go through that again so as to save time. And I would like to actually invite the two speakers, panelists who've not spoken before earlier. We have some questions already, and which I would like to put to each one of the panelists. And then we will open up the session for questions from the floor, from all of you. And I see there are some questions that have already come in. Now, Mr. Nguyen, the question to you is this. One of the main initiatives promoted by the Disability Research and Capacity Development part of in Vietnam is an accessibility campaign which includes surveys, training, and spatial mapping of accessibility to various public services, which is very important. Could you share with us your experience highlighting the role that community-based organizations can play in supporting local governments to consider accessibility and inclusivity when realizing or improving public urban services? I know it's a long question, but please, over to you, Mr. Nguyen.
Thank you, Reta. Thank you for your question. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tung Nguyen. I'm from DRD Vietnam. So before answer your question, may I have a short introduction about our organization? DRD is called Disability Research and Capacity Development. Is an organization of and for people with disability that has been working to promote the rights of people with disability in Vietnam. And we established in 2005, we chose the International Day of People with Disabilities to start to run the organization. It's been in the 3rd of December. And our mission is to empower people with disability and transform the society so that people with disability can develop their fullness of their capacity and be fully included in all social activity. So regarding the accessibilities, uh, as you may know, accessibility is legal requirement in Vietnam. So we have laws, we have policy to promote the accessibility is not only for people with disabilities, but for all people in our country. But there's a big gap between the written documents and the practice. And the majority of public places and buildings and means of transport are inaccessible. So, as a community-based organization, um, we set up and we raise some campaigns to promote the accessibilities in Vietnam, especially in some big cities like Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi, and others. Yeah. And the ways we do is we involve everyone in the project. For example, we use the technology to develop a DMAP. Disability maps is like a map to guide people with disability how to uh, find the destination or the places whether it's accessible for them or not. If not, they have to prepare. And to involve the government, we working with the local authorities. We involve them into in the process of making plan, and we organize the activity like training, raising awareness, training to help them understand the importance of the accessibility for people with disabilities. Uh, and they also understand that that's not only not important only for people with disability, but also for uh, people in common. Like so, when they understand it, they have the same language and they will involve in the project. And we do alone. We go with other organization, like we have a network of DPO, like disabled people organization. We're working with the student at the university and colleges. We also connect with other like enterprise, and make them change their attitude and knowledge and understanding the importance of uh, accessibility for all. So we also have the task force to help to help us audit the public places. I mean, we have, when we have a plan, when we have ideas, we the organization, the community based organization should be a leading organization to, and encourage how make people understand what we want to do, and what we do will empower the community, not only for the disability community, but for people in common, like because people will get old. People may have accident or incident, or and uh, maybe people with disability in some day they can sit on the wheelchair, and they can feel some difficulty and challenge when they access the public places. So we make them understanding, and we also based on the laws and the policy. We have the construction code.
Yeah.
We have the
Mhm.
construction standard. So we get to invite them and encourage them to join with us. Yeah, and
Thank you,
yeah,
Mr.
yeah,
Nguyen. I'm
that's
sorry.
yeah, yeah.
You'll have another opportunity to come back when we have the open panel session. Okay.
Okay,
I'd
thank you
like
so
to
much.
next bring on stage Miss Antoinette Anaban, and there is a question for you about the city of Baguio. Oh, I hear that it's making a great effort in integrating a gender transformative approach in a project related to flood management, which is so critical at this time of climate change and fast and furious rains and flash floods. And so we would be very happy to hear uh, how your experience can help support local governments in improving understanding about drivers of gendered vulnerability and how to link the needs of vulnerable groups into actual urban plans. So over to you now, Antoinette, please.
Good morning and good afternoon to you all. Allow me to start my talk by sharing first the overview and background of the project that the city is endeavoring. So currently, the ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund is supporting Baguio City in implementing the Smart Flood Early Warning Information and Mitigation System project, which is assisting the city with both the planning for flood mitigation and the delivery of the services of flood early warning and responses using smart technologies. The intended outcome is improve the flood early warning system responses and mitigation measures of Baguio. As a complement and to enhance this, an associated project is being implemented specifically to ensure that appropriate, applicable, and timely early warning reaches the last mile, including the most vulnerable, recognizing that effective flood early warning system are people-centric. Here in Baguio, we think that gender is a critical consideration in ensuring an effective FUSE or flood early warning system that leaves no one behind. We know views that does not explicitly consider gender will likely be gender unequal, increasing the marginalization and vulnerability of groups who have less power and influence. Importantly, we believe that proactive efforts are needed to incorporate the needs, priorities, and capabilities of marginalized gender groups and magnify their voices at every stage of the flood early warning system. Baguio City has been collaborating with Rumble, which is tasked with implementing the ASEAN Smart Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund, as well as practical action consulting to implement gender transformative approach to flood early warning system. The flood early warning system is set to become an integral element within the overall vision of Baguio City to become a truly resilient, dynamic, and smart city for all residents. The project approach strategy, as well as the tools or guidelines that were used or being proposed to help mainstream GEDSI to improve the city's urban planning, service delivery, financial management. The Gender Transformative Flood Early Warning System project is structured to feed into the overarching smart flood early warning information and mitigation system. Importantly, providing specific, usable, and relevant actions and guidance on gender transformative approaches that can be built into the design and implementation of the FUSE. It has delivered so far a study on gender and inclusion and policy and practice recommendations for a gender transformative flood early warning system. Currently, the city is working with the Australian ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund on actions to take the recommendations forward and support the flood early warning system to become gender transformative. I'd like to focus on the study conducted and which has informed the recommendations and actions under development. The tools and approaches used in this study are unique and have allowed us to understand vulnerability and marginalization in Baguio City in a really meaningful way and which could be relevant for other cities as well. The study brought together a suite of analysis and data collection techniques to deliver a holistic understanding of the connections between flood risk and gender, marginalization, and equality within Baguio. The team conducted 3 types of quantitative and qualitative primary data collection, including a community survey, key informant interviews, and missing voices interviews. On the question on how to support local governments improve the understanding about drivers of gender vulnerability and how to link the needs of vulnerable groups into actual urban plans, I think the most important thing is to prioritize understanding the missing voices as well as the mainstream voices. We learn so much about the real challenges and experiences of members of our community that are really living on the margins with no voice. These are the people that don't often get reflected in data, who are unable or unwilling to access services due to their status as marginalized or vulnerable. In order to improve understanding on gendered vulnerability and marginalization by local government, I think there is a need to first recognize that very often the most marginalized and vulnerable would not be comfortable in engaging with local government. So it's ensuring that local government is able to understand the needs and challenges of these communities in ways that they are socially acceptable through trusted non-government organization and other community-based organizations, providing and seeking out multiple ways for local government to ensure that these feedback loops are built into systems is really important in being able to understand needs and challenges and then find sensitive ways to address them through local government activity. I think there is also a need to conduct capacity building and awareness at a local micro-government level in enhancing awareness of who actually are the marginalized and vulnerable in your city and the ways in which we can involve and engage these communities in our planning and implementation so that their needs can be better met. So before I will end this, if you would want to know more about our flood early warning system project, please connect again tomorrow as I will be sharing a separate presentation on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Antoinette. Now, can I ask, there's a question here for Husnaini about cultural values in ASEAN and which are still very dominant and influence the communities and they limit progress towards achieving gender equality. How can we shape development initiatives to be cultural and gender responsive, yet without disrupting the values of the community? Husnaini, over to you.
Thank you, Rita, for the question. It's a very broad question, and I think even within ASEAN countries, member states, yeah, we have different cultures And there are cultures that are actually very that support gender equality and empower women. But there are also cultures that seems to repress women's empowerment and their position and their place in the society. Now, I think from the experience that we work with at Wairu Commission, we organize grassroots women group. I think that's a starting point. Working with organized grassroots women group who have been who had gone through awareness raising on women's empowerment, on women's leadership, on how central women is actually in terms of development process. They're not just housewife or the partner of
Partnerships,
yeah,
yeah.
but they are actually what do you call that? I would say um, equal partner in the household. They have influence in the household. So you start with the household awareness raising, and then women organize. They are supported in their empowerment. The other thing I think also that is important is actually getting to change the political wheel. So that means
Yes.
working with political leaders. Now we know political leaders, women. We still have smaller numbers of women leaders, women in politics. So and therefore women in decision making at governance level, at the public space, public structure. So I think those are the thing. And so in addition to working with organized grassroots group, particularly those led by women, it's also to change and to influence and work with political parties. I think that's one of the key.
Thank
Uh,
you. Thank you,
yeah.
Snaini. Very important guidance from you. Thank you. I'm sorry we are running out of time. So I'm going to raise here a question from the floor, uh, and it's open to any panel members to respond to. It's regarding the measurement of SDG achievement. How do you measure it, particularly in the smaller secondary cities? Although several NGOs and communities are doing it, they are not linked up with the local government. And this issue has been raised just now. How do we link up? What mechanisms can we establish, like maybe a GEDSI consultative group that's to be linked up with the local government in order to get the attention of the local government? And it can be a mutually supportive partnership, local government and the NGOs and the local communities. So I open it up to all of the speakers. Anyone can respond to this. And I think that's all we have time for, and then we need to close the session. So please, over to you all of you. Miguel, any ideas?
Thank
Madeline, please.
Thank you, Reta. Maybe just one message from the ASEAN Secretariat and on ASEAN's partnership. I think in response to the question and the key message to this forum is that there are existing consultative platforms within the ASEAN for very substantive engagement on mainstreaming gender equality and disability inclusion. First, there is a clear mandate for ASEAN member states and the sectoral bodies of ASEAN to cooperate on this issue. And second, there are already existing initiatives at the regional level that can link with national and also sub-national initiatives. And circling back to your question, Reta, there are clearly things that are ongoing now that we can use as building blocks so we can clearly monitor the delivery of SDGs, and more importantly, making sure that these have impacts on the lives of people in ASEAN. So with
Thank you.
that, I end my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. What about you, Madeline? Can you say something? How can we link up the local communities with the local governments to measure the SDGs, achievement of the SDGs?
Um, Yes, achievement of SDGs is, for me, in my opinion, it is matters on how people continue to uh, work with this, with their advocacy and their issue. But I always I am giving I am giving an paano ba uh strong opinion about people's participatory, because if the issue was informed with the people, and they are the one uh, they are they are involved with the process, they are continue to planning, and they will be accountable for everything that will happen in the community. Peoples are will always be active on their issues, and they will long for development and improvement for their life situation. So,
Thank
uh,
you. Thank you, Madeline. Really very important to get a grassroots speaker to come on board. Now, sorry, people, but that's all we have time for today. So now, just to conclude, I would like to say if there are three important things that we need to take away, uh, it's the political will and leadership that's extremely important at all levels, not just at the ASEAN level, but at the national country level, at the local government level. You know, they need to be accountable and they need to be responsive to the communities they are serving. So that leadership is extremely important. The second thing is how do we, the intersectionality, you know, some of the communities, they have multiple forms of discrimination and barriers to coming on board. And you know, the SDGs talk about leaving no one behind in the development for the Agenda 2030. Leave no one behind. We have to bring everyone on board. And some of the communities face multiple discrimination, intersectionality, particularly persons with disabilities, as you know. They have a lot of challenges. And the challenge for us is how do we bring them all together? How can we be inclusive in the development that we are seeking, in the urbanization that we are seeking? So that's the second point. The third one is how do we bridge the gap? I'm not talking about the digital division. That too is very, very important. The whole digital divide. How do we bring the marginalized groups on board, to be able to manage the whole digitalization process? But the divide that happens between the local governments and the community, how do we create mechanisms to bring on board on the same platform the communities and the government, not only at the national level, but at the subnational state levels, province levels? What mechanisms can we create? And I would say gender GEDSI consultative group can be established with representatives from all of the different marginalized groups to come periodically, maybe once in 3 months or so, together with the local government and government, to be consultative on the Agenda 2030 and how we can implement that. Now, I think these are some of the important things that I glimpsed from. Of course, there are a lot of very important things, and particularly like the important frameworks that Miguel raised, that's existing at the ASEAN level, but unknown to all of us on the ground. How can ASEAN Secretariat make all of these frameworks known to the leaders of every ASEAN country, not only at the central level, but at the subnational level, at the state, provincial level, and to make all of these frameworks, some of the new ones I've just heard for the first time myself, how can we make all of this known to the people so that the people can hold the governments accountable for implementing those? So these are some very important thoughts that we need to take back with us. And with that, I think, Bianca, I can conclude the session. Is that all right? We are just gone 1:30, I think, from here, which is about 12, I guess. No, 12:30 your time. So I will conclude the sum up here now, and just ask if any one of you have anything burning to say or some important issue that I've left out. So please, please feel free, and then I think the organizers will close the session. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Retta. Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you.
I think working with with community is very important component, and that's also the SDG part. You know, the monitoring and all that, getting their input into that, and recognizing their data as well. You know, it's important because they usually only look at very formal things. So the narrative, the narrative part of the experience is as important as the numbers, and so the quantitative and the qualitative are as important. That's I want to. Yeah.
Thank you. Well said, Sunain. Well said. So thank you all. I think we are free to leave now. Are we, organizers?
Thank you very much, Rita, for moderating, and all.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.